Hello my friends, and welcome back to another video. Today we are embracing pumpkin spice because we are in fall. I know we're into October now, but I really wasn't in the pumpkin mood until now. So we're gonna do three kind of, I don't know, I wouldn't say like super unique, but fun recipes using pumpkin in a different way, just to kind of embrace that fall favorite flavor. So the first thing we're going to do is make some pumpkin spice energy bites, energy balls. I know there's like a million different like terms for these little bites, but essentially we're making a pumpkin spice flavor. So we are going to use the food processor for this, and the first thing we're going to do is chop up our nuts. And if you're using whole oats, you want to add your oats in first, just to kind of get them a little bit like smaller so you don't have super big chunks of nuts. And for this recipe, I'm using 1 cup of oat flour and about 1/3 cup of walnuts. So we're going to add that into the food processor, give that a blitz so it gets nice and small, the nuts that is, and then we're going to add in the rest of the ingredients, which includes 1/4 cup of pumpkin puree, 2 teaspoons of pumpkin spice. You can also add more if you like, or you can just use cinnamon, and then 10 pitted dates. And then also vanilla, salt, a tablespoon of flax, and a tablespoon of maple syrup. And when I made this, I added in about 1/2 cup of the oat flour first, and then kind of let that kind of mix up and break down a little bit before I added in the rest, just because I wanted to be sure that like it wasn't going to be too dry. So I would recommend adding in 1/2 of the oat flour, giving it a blend, and then adding in a little bit more, and just compensating for the consistency if, like, say your dates are a little bit drier, or I don't know, like, you know, you just want to make sure that it's a workable consistency. So it should turn into this kind of like thick dough paste type situation. And I decided that I was going to add some mini chocolate chips to half of this. So I separated it into 2 little bowls, and then I added about, honestly, probably like 1/4 cup of chocolate chips to this, and just kind of mix that up until it was generally combined. Alternatively, if you wanted to melt down some chocolate, you could do that and then dip the energy bites into that chocolate once it is melted. I just decided to keep this low key and didn't want to do that. So then what I did is I used my small cookie scoop to scoop out, I think this is like 2 tablespoons maybe. Honestly, I don't know. It's just the smallest like cookie scoop, and rolled them into balls. I am wearing gloves because I had a few little cuts on my fingers, so I didn't want to like contaminate them, but you definitely don't have to wear gloves. But it also makes for like a super easy cleanup because this dough is pretty sticky, to be honest. But essentially I just portioned it out into little balls and was done. And you don't even have to like roll them into balls if you don't want to. Just use the cookie scoop and like plop them on the tray, and then bam, you're done. So that is like the extent of this recipe. I made all the little balls, and then I put them in the fridge to kind of set up, and then I did store them in the fridge just so they stayed good for longer. They're good for about a week or so in the fridge, and you can also freeze them and they'll last even longer. Just make sure you put them in an airtight container. I would say probably use them within 3 months after freezing them. You can eat them right out of the freezer. You can eat them cold. You can drizzle them in chocolate. It's a really kind of, you know, flexible type recipe. So kind of just do that with you will, do as you will. I think this made like almost, honestly, I don't remember. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 3, 6, 9, 12. It almost made 24, but not quite. So I would say like a little less than 2 dozen. I think it made like 20, but it also depends on how big you make your little energy bites. But this was a really fun fall snack, so I hope you enjoy it. The next recipe, we are going to be making pumpkin pancakes. These pancakes were super good, and I'm using some sourdough discard in this recipe. If you don't do sourdough, I will leave some substitutions for that in the description box below, so you're still able to try this recipe. Essentially, we're using the sourdough discard just as kind of like part of the liquid to this recipe. I'm still kind of experimenting and learning about like using sourdough discard in recipes. So yeah, but I made blueberry pancakes with this recipe. You could see that in one of my previous videos. This is very, very similar. Essentially, I just substituted pumpkin puree for the applesauce in that original recipe and did not add blueberries. But essentially, we're going to mix all the wet ingredients together and then add the dry ingredients and just make pancakes. So if you like pancakes and want like a fall spin on them, this is a really fun way to use a little bit of pumpkin. There's only a 1/4 cup of pumpkin puree in here, so there's not a super strong pumpkin flavor, and it's really the like pumpkin spice mix that gives it its like flavor. So you really can like alter how spicy it is. And if you're not a fan of like pumpkin spice, like the spice blend, for one, you can make your own so you can control which flavor is the strongest, but you can also just use cinnamon. I find that like a lot of times I'll just substitute just cinnamon because like I'm not a huge pumpkin spice fan, and I think it's because of clove. Like I have a bit of an allergy to clove too, so like I try to kind of like avoid eating that. In small doses it seems to be fine. It's more of like if it gets on my skin, but whatever, that's not important. So yeah, so you can substitute either pumpkin pie spice, I know like apple pie spice is a thing, or just cinnamon in terms of the spice. And this would also be a really great opportunity to add chocolate chips. I thought about doing it, but since I added chocolate chips in the energy bite recipe, I just decided to like not. But this batter smelled so good, I felt like I could eat it right then. But yeah, so you make your batter and then you just make the pancakes. And I used a stainless steel pan, and just make sure that you oil it properly. You can use a nonstick pan, but I find like a cast iron or a stainless steel pan works a lot better for pancakes. So I will just kind of let you all watch me make these delicious pancakes, and then we'll check back in at the end because I have a bonus recipe for some cinnamon maple butter to go with these pancakes. said, to go with these delicious pancakes, we're going to level things up by making some whipped cinnamon maple butter, and it is a lot easier to make this if you have like a stand mixer or a like handheld mixer, but we're very simply going to add 1 stick of vegan butter that is room temperature into our mixer with about 1/4 cup of maple syrup, 1/4 cup of powdered sugar, 1 tablespoon of cinnamon, and 1/2 to 1 teaspoon of vanilla. I think I did a full teaspoon of vanilla, and you're just going to add that all into the mixer and give it a good whip until it turns into a nice fluffy consistency. It does take a little bit of time, but you can kind of see it does change the consistency, and if you need to stop and wipe down the sides of your bowl, just make sure you do that so everything gets combined. But as you can see, it turns into this nice fluffy delicious texture, and once this is done, you could serve it right away or just put it in a container and use it just like butter. Great for bagels and pancakes and tons of stuff. A great like fall-ish addition to kind of like a lot of these recipes. It kind of is like Texas Roadhouse butter, if you know, you know, but it's a vegan version, so how great is that? So for this last recipe, we are going the savory route. I know this is something that I wasn't sure was gonna turn out, but it ended up turning out really good. We're going to be making a creamy pumpkin pasta. So the first thing you want to do is heat up your pans. So boil some water, and we're going to cook whatever pasta you want according to the package directions. I used about, for this particular recipe, I did 2 cups of dry macaroni noodles just because I thought it would be kind of like a mac and cheese vibe. And then while your water is boiling, you want to heat up a pretty big pan, because this is all going to get mixed together eventually. And into that preheated pan, we're going to melt about 2 tablespoons of vegan butter and add in about 1 to like a half of a white onion that's chopped up. And this is just going to like depend on how big your onion is. I did a smaller onion, so it wasn't super big, just to kind of add a little bit of extra flavor in that. And then once this cooks down a little bit, we're going to add just a sprinkling of salt, just to kind of add a little extra flavor, which is pretty standard. And then I added a little bit of black pepper in here, again just adding some layers of flavor into this recipe. And you're going to cook this until it becomes translucent. And then once it kind of cooks down for a little bit, we're going to add in our chopped garlic, which, you know, I feel like garlic is one of those things you measure with your heart. And then I was cooking the pasta simultaneously. About 4 minutes before the pasta is done, optionally, you can add in 1 cup of frozen peas in with the pasta water. It just kind of is a way to save a dish and kind of cook that together with the pasta. It just makes it so much easier. And essentially the peas just need to like defrost. So it's a win-win, you know, so double whammy per se. But like I said, coming back to our sauce pan here, we add in the garlic, and you want to cook that for about a minute or so. And then optionally, if you want to add some red pepper flakes, I was using Aleppo pepper for this because it's something that I just got, and I think I did like a 1/4 teaspoon, but you definitely don't have to. Just kind of add to your tastes, you know, depending. If you don't want any spice, don't do it. Sometimes black pepper is enough. Be flexible. You know, this is a recipe that I made, but it's definitely something that you can modify to fit your own taste. I will say adding a little bit of spice did kind of make this dish like, I don't know, like it balanced out the sweetness from like the other spices in the pumpkin. So yeah, but anyway, and then after the onion is nice and translucent and the garlic has cooked down and become fragrant, we're going to add our flour. So we're doing 2 tablespoons of flour, and you just want to kind of stir that so the flour kind of gets absorbed and like sticks to the onions. And then we're going to add in the rest of our salt, and pepper. So we do about a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of pepper to start, and you can always add more as you go. I highly recommend tasting your food as you go, so that way you can kind of adjust your seasoning as needed. You can always add more salt and pepper at the end, so I prefer to not overdo it in the beginning, like when we're starting out a recipe like this. So again, just making sure that that flour gets a little bit toasty and coated on all of the onions and garlic, and then we're going to go in with our liquid ingredients. In this particular version of this recipe, I did use oat milk, so I did about 2 cups of oat milk. Alternatively, you can use 1 can of coconut milk. I did like the flavor a little bit better with the coconut milk. It just was a lot richer because the coconut milk is like fatty, but I didn't have a can of coconut milk when I was filming this, so I just used oat milk. And if you don't like coconut or you're allergic to coconut, then use oat milk, so it's totally fine. So essentially what we're going to do is add in our 2 cups of oat milk a little bit at a time, because you want to like constantly stir and whisk the onions and garlic flour mixture together with the milk so you don't have clumps. So if you do a little bit at a time, that kind of reduces the chance of having like a clump of flour in your sauce. This is like how you would make a roux. So essentially we're making a roux here as the base for our sauce. And then we're just adding like a little bit of milk at a time. And I would definitely recommend using a whisk for this. It just makes it a lot easier. And again, just another way to make sure you are avoiding those clumps. And something that I didn't have written out in the recipe, I don't think, I may have added it, I don't remember, but this ended up being really thick. So I ended up adding about a cup of just regular water to this too. You can use broth, or you don't have to if you don't mind it being thick, but it was just a little too thick for me once I added the pumpkin. So once your roux kind of combined here, you have your nice thick sauce, you're going to add in your full full can of pumpkin puree and just kind of stir it together. And as you can see, it's becoming very thick. Another way to kind of avoid the super thickness of the sauce, you can skip adding the flour, because the flour does make it nice and thick. This would also be a great like base for a soup if you didn't want to add pasta to it. I would just put it in the immersion blender, add a little bit more liquid, and bam, you got like a pumpkin soup. I'd probably adjust the spice a little bit just to give it a little bit more flavor, but this is why you definitely want to use a pan with high edges, because this sauce does kind of bulk up pretty quickly, especially when you go to add the pasta in. It's definitely filling to the brim. I have a bigger pan, but it's in storage. So yeah, definitely use like a big pan. And if you don't have a pan with high edges like this, you can use a pot, like a soup pot. That is a great way to kind of make sure that you have enough like room in your pan, pot, whatever, so you're not overflowing. So if I make this again, that's probably what I'll use, just to make it a little bit easier. And then once this has cooked down for about 10 minutes, you're gonna go ahead and add in your nutritional yeast. You're gonna do about a 1/4 cup of nutritional yeast, a tablespoon of miso, just to add a little bit of umami, and then our spices. So I added in about a tablespoon of sage, and then I don't think the pasta water is necessary here since it was super thick, so you don't really have to add that. You can just use regular water or broth. Again, just because this was really thick, that isn't something I like considered when I started this recipe, that the pumpkin puree was going to add thickness to it. But it was an oversight. It was an experiment. And then we're also going to add in some freshly grated nutmeg to this. I kind of eyeballed it because I was doing fresh nutmeg. If you're using just pre-ground, I would say start with 1/8 of a teaspoon, give it a taste. If you want more, add another 1/8. I think a 1/4 teaspoon is probably pretty good for this. It is strong. It can be a strong flavor. So again, you don't want to overdo it. But again, measure with your heart. So add a little bit in, taste it. If it needs more of something, add more. I did a little taste test here and decided to add a smidge more salt and pepper, and then another half a teaspoon of sage. I would highly recommend using fresh sage in this recipe, like a couple tablespoons of that. But the thing is, like with fresh herbs, is like you kind of have to use them all. So I decided that I was just going to use ground sage, so I didn't buy a whole package of sage, and then it ended up going bad in my fridge. But if you have a bunch of recipes you're going to use for it, by all means, definitely fresh sage. And then I also decided last minute to add about a teaspoon of cinnamon. I think that just kind of like pulls out those like pumpkin spice like flavors per se, but that is optional. You definitely don't have to add that in. It is completely optional. And then once everything was combined, and you do want to stir this for a while just to make sure that miso is nice and dissolved, you're going to add in your pasta and peas. And again, the peas are optional. I just wanted to add a little bit of protein and a pop of color into this dish just to make it a little bit more fun. But essentially you're just going to stir everything together until it is nice and coated and combined, and that is it. So I hope you guys enjoyed these recipes. I know that it is pumpkin season, so I wanted to do like a ingredient 3 ways recipe themed for fall. This pasta was really good. I definitely enjoyed it. It's not something I would make every day, but it was definitely a fun twist to the pumpkin flavor. So let me know in the comments section below what your favorite recipe is, or if you have any other delicious pumpkin recipes that you've been making or other fall treats, or if you have any like 1 ingredient 3-way suggestion ideas for this kind of little series that I have on my channel. It's really fun to use an ingredient in multiple ways and create those dishes. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks again for being here, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Bye for now.